Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our grant writing workshop. I'm still Kate, and I'm still joined with my colleagues, Jeff Folsom and Mary Collins, and we're from the Center for Children, Families, and Workforce Development. All right, let me just get this going. So last week, we had an opportunity to sort of set the tone for grant writing. And the theme of last week was go slow to go fast. And so we introduced a framework to help you think through how do you assess your readiness to apply for the grant that will then help you implement these programs, so these ideas that you have. So we talked about types of funding, the ingredients of a fundable project, and we talked a little bit also about where to search for funding opportunities, but we're going to talk more about that today. So for part 2 today, we're going to roll up our sleeves and talk more specifically about those essential elements of a grant proposal. And we're going to talk about how do you kind of get started so that you can prepare yourself to write a real comprehensive proposal. So that's our plan. All right, we want to know who's here today. And so in the chat, if you can share with us, so I'll post the question, you type it out, and then when I say send, hit return so we can see the waterfall of the chat here. So the first question, we want to know again the name, town you work in, and your job title. All right, we got the Sydney team back, Kalispell. Mary zooming in from Davis, California with us today, Billings. All right, so you can see my second questions on the screen here. If you had $1 million, no strings attached, what would you fund? We got mental health, housing, homelessness, community mental health and home services, care for animals, a farm for special needs. Okay, and then the last question, in the spirit of summer, even though I know we're experiencing unfortunately, it's a smoky day in Montana, but we want to know what's your favorite Montana summer activity? What are you looking forward to? Gardening, camping, visiting the cat cafes, Billings. That's where you're going to have to go because we've got one on the cusp of an opening. Floating, hiking, camping, deck and beverages, jumping in the water. Oh man, this really kind of just makes you want to close up for the day and head outside. But so here's what we're going to do today. So the bulk of today is going to be spent drilling down on those specific components of a grant proposal. So we're going to divide kind of the anatomy of a grant into 4 sections. So part 1, and Mary is going to kick us off and talk about problem statement, description of need, methods. And so it's going to be a continuation of the framework that we presented last week to really help you define that problem statement for your grant proposal. Then I'm going to talk about parts 2 and 3, which are writing your goals, your objectives, your work plan, your evaluation plan. And I'm going to focus in on creating logic models as a way to organize your thinking and help you connect that problem statement to your evaluation. And then after my section, we're going to divide into 3 small groups and each meet with Jeff and Mary and I, and we're going to take these ideas and work with you to apply the ideas to your proposals in your communities. And then we're going to come back together and discuss part 4. So Jeff's going to talk about sustainability and budget and kind of what are some considerations to keep in mind. And then we're going to jump back into those small groups, finish up kind of taking these concepts, putting them onto paper for our individual proposals. And then we're going to wrap up the day again, talking about where do we look for the funding, and Mary's going to help us with that. So that's the plan. And Mary, you're on.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. So yeah, like Kate said, I'm kicking us off with really the start of what is in every grant proposal, which is that problem statement, description of need, and methods. And so when we talk about problem statements, it really is, what is the problem that you're solving for? Why are we all here? Why are you working, putting time, effort, resources into this application? Why is this funding available? What is it that you're trying to address? The problem statement, you really want to keep it succinct. There should be like no ambiguity in what that is. And so we're talking about like a 1 to 2 sentence. Here's why we're here. Here's what we're trying to solve. Description of need is really where you expand upon that. So who's impacted by that problem and in what way? So you really, just like we talked about last week, it's also talking about what's the data and information that validates that statement. How do you bring in some of that research, relevant data that shows, yes, this is a problem and this is the impact of that problem. And so you're thinking about what's my target population. If we're thinking about last week, we talked about tobacco cessation. If we're thinking about youth, who are those folks in the community? What are the data points that you could bring in to say, unequivocally, we know that this is a problem for this population and this is how it impacts them. And then methods are really the what are you going to do about it? And so I won't go into a lot of detail around those pieces because Kate will get really into sort of how to put together your plan of action within the grant. But methods is where you say, and now that I've said, here's the problem, I've described what it is, how it impacts our target population, I'm now saying, and this is what we propose doing about it. So this is really the meat of what you hook a funder with in a grant application. They really want to be able to see that clear line of, we've identified this, we understand how it's impacting, and we also now know this is a clear thing that we could do to potentially mitigate it or to help improve. And so some considerations there, I think we talked a lot about this last week in terms of like grant writing errors and some common mistakes is just specificity. So be as clear, succinct as possible. There should be no doubt in the reader's or reviewer's mind in terms of what you're choosing to focus on. And make sure that you're making that connection between the problem and also this available funding. You know, what is it, if you've identified this issue within your community, within your state, what is it about this funding source that is then applicable to help address that? So always keep that in mind and make that thread. Data over opinions. And again, we talked about this last week and we'll reiterate here, particularly in the beginning of a grant application. You do not want to be sort of caught talking about like we think, we believe, we assume. You really want to be able to show evidence that roots your application in some real world understanding. The funder should have no doubt about, okay, these people understand and I can see this research, this data, this evidence that this is a worthy issue worth of funding and approaching and tackling. And then with methods, you know, what's realistic? Always sort of keeping in mind, like we can always have pie in the sky, what would be ideal? But when you're applying for funding, really making sure you're keeping in mind, what could we as our organization, our agency, realistically do about this problem? And if not, if the answer is, I don't know, or the answer is beyond your capacity, perhaps you're not the right entity to apply for the funding and to address that. Or perhaps that's the sign that you need to then find partners to build up capacity to work together. So you might be thinking this looks familiar and this talk is familiar because this is essentially the hexagon tool. So really having you think through clarity around what you're doing and why you're doing it. So when you think about problem statement and description of need, that really brings us right back to that needs section of the hexagon tool, where we ask, who's the target population and what's their need? And you should always be coming back to this at the start of your grant application. If you don't have this nailed down, the rest of your application is going to be super complicated and messy. It'll be hard to put together a plan of action if you do not have a clear target from the get-go. So this is an example, and this might be a little tiny for y'all, but when in the grant template that we shared with you after the last call, this is our example. So we're thinking about a problem statement. You say young people in Montana are at risk for suicide. Simple, clean, to the point. A reader of this application will be able to go, okay, that's the problem. That's why we're here today. And then they're looking for you to then expand upon that and show them why and how you know that's a problem and to what extent. And so that's when you bring in evidence, data that supports that claim. So in your description of need, you would be able to bring things in like this suicide in Montana report from DPHHS or youth risk behavior survey, where you bring in relevant data pieces to be able to say, and here are specific points that show us what the target population is and how it impacts them. So when we're talking about young people in our problem statement, in your description of need, you can then use data and reports to be able to say, and when we say young people, we're talking about folks 15 to 24. That's our target population. And so you're able to expand upon that for the funder, the reader, to then say, okay, these folks know what they're talking about, and this is a legitimate issue because we have this data to prove it and we have this information that validates what they're saying. And then with methods, again, this is really, so what are you going to do about it? And that's always sort of the big question, right? When you're writing a grant. And that's the part as a grant reader and evaluator, having been on that end, that's the exciting part, where you get to say, okay, we can come around with this understanding of an issue. We can see the stats around how it's impacting folks within our community, within our state. And now what is this organization within their context, within their expertise, within their community? What do they want to do about it? And this can be certainly room for creativity, but should also be rooted in evidence of effectiveness. And so when you think about methods, this is where you're saying, what are the actions that we're going to take to address the problem? But also asking, how do we know that those actions, those interventions will be effective for the target population that we're talking about? So again, that just brings you right back to that evidence piece of the hexagon tool, where you're asking, how can your proposal address that need? And what evidence do you have to suggest that? So when you're saying, if we're talking about suicide amongst youth in Montana, if you're talking about in-school services, in-school mental health services, that's what we propose doing. We'd like to get some funding to have a counselor in our local middle school. What's the evidence that you can then bring in that shows that that's been effective at reducing youth suicide in other settings, particularly other settings that are similar to the community that you're talking about, whether that's rural, urban, tribal, and bringing that evidence to bear in your proposal. And so I'm not going to go any sort of further into how you then make that more robust and the pieces you put together and talking about how to action that, because that really is sort of the next bulk of it that Kate is going to go over.
All right. So yes, the bulk, the meaty section of your grant. And I agree with Mary when her statement that this is the fun part, right? This is the fun part where you get to be creative and really propose ideas or activities that are going to address this unmet need or this problem statement. So for this part, we're going to talk about goals, objectives, the design, the work plan, the logic models. We got a lot that I'm going to touch on. But first I want to talk about the goals and objectives. So goals are essentially the plan that you want to accomplish, and goals are generally broad. Objectives are generally shorter term, more specific, measurable actions that help you achieve that broader goal. So for example, using suicide prevention, we want to say our goal is that we want to improve care coordination for suicide prevention in schools. That's our broad goal. And then our objective, which, how will we do this specifically, is, number one, we're going to train teachers to recognize the warning signs among students and to intervene and refer to counselors. Objective two, we're going to train school counselors to conduct suicide screens and assessment. And then, objective 3 under this goal is we want to establish a partnership with local mental health centers to receive referrals as needed, right? Broad goal, more specific objective. So when you are writing your goals and your objectives, you want to keep them SMART, right? So SMART, you remember this probably from your schooling or the work that you're doing, but SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound, right? So these objectives, they need to be clearly stated so that anyone reading it, whether they have experience on the topic or not, they understand what will be done and who will do it. Measurable means that these objectives include how the action or the intervention or the activities, the project, how it will be measured. How do you know if you're making progress? How will you know if you're on track and you're on schedule? Achievable. So this is your objectives are realistic. They given the realities that you face in your organization and your community. You're not promising anything that you can't actually accomplish, right? So you want to keep these objectives achievable. Relevant means that it makes sense, that it fits the purpose of the grant and what's in the RFP. It fits the culture and structure of your community or agency, and it addresses the vision of the project. And then time bound is that each objective has a really specific timeline for completion. So you're really drilling down. So Mary talked a little bit about methods, and in terms of like, what are you going to do to address the problem? So this design piece is really about the set of activities that you will implement to address the program. Like, this is bringing the methods to life. How do you create or how you articulate a plan that's reasonable, but also creative and inspiring? So a helpful way to organize your thinking, assure that this roadmap or this work plan makes sense, and that your goals and your objectives are measurable, your program design is doable, is to develop a logic model. So show me either your hands, like an actual hand, or the little hand icon, if folks have used logic models in the past. Kind of curious what the temperature is here on the, okay, Emily, you love, Emily, how do you feel about logic models? Do you like them? Do you find them helpful? Okay. All right, I'm not seeing, oh, I see some thumbs up. That's what we got. Yep. Some, Mary has seen them. Okay. So I'm gonna give you a brief overview of logic models. So with logic models, you may be responding to a grant or writing a grant proposal where a logic model is required. You have to submit a logic model in your proposal. And these are typically sort of the bigger federal grants will require that you also submit a logic model. Regardless of if a logic model is required or not, it really can help you organize your thinking. And I'm not a particularly linear thinker, but there's something about the logic model that really resonates for me because it makes all those pieces, all those elements of a program make sense because I can see how the interconnection, I can see how they're connected. So here's just an everyday example, right? The problem is you're hungry, right? So the resources available to you to address this problem is food, right? And the activity that you're going to do is you're going to get the food and you're going to eat the food. Okay. So after you've got the food, the activity is you're eating the food, you're doing this to address the problem, which is hunger, and your expected outcome is then to feel better, right? Here's your logic model. This is essentially what we're doing with our logic model. We're connecting the problem to the outcome. So now this is a little bit more complicated here, but still connected, still kind of illustrates the same point. So Mary has talked about the problem statement or identifying your statement of need. We talked about it quite a bit last session as well. So you kind of start with the problem statement in mind. You identify that goal, which I talked about, and that goal serves as the elements, kind of the elements that all the logic model pieces will follow, right? So if you're clear about your goal, what you're trying to do, and who you're trying to serve, then the rest of the pieces you've kind of set that good foundation for the rest of the logic model, right? So the goal is, I'll use an example of a program I worked with. So the goal is they wanted to increase peer-based recovery supports for folks living in Montana using a harm reduction model targeting folks that were experiencing homelessness. And so, but they're using the harm reduction model. So that would be the goal, is to increase access to recovery support services. Now, resources, those include, what are those inputs, those program investments that your agency already has that's going to help you be successful. So this includes your staffing, your leadership, your volunteers, your building, your grants, your other kind of similar programs that might help you kind of kick this new program off the ground. So for the project that I was working for, you know, they had full staff, they had a board, they had volunteers that were already engaged, they had received a SAMHSA grant. Now the activities, right? This is what you plan to do, the specific actions that you want to take to address that problem statement and to reach those goals, right? So this is, train peers to provide peer support. It could be, training teachers. It could be, in another project, it could be increasing public outreach for vaccine education, right? These are the specific things that you're going to do to accomplish your goals. Now, outputs, those are like the how many, right? How many trainings you're going to do, how many peers that you're going to train up, how many community members you're going to target with your services, for example. It needs to be specific and measurable. The problem with the output, or oftentimes with our evaluation plans, is that we stop here, right? We say, I'm going to train 50 teachers, I'm going to train 100 schools, whatever it may be, and that's how I'm going to evaluate my success. Well, that's step one. How much of what you did is step one. But in order to really say whether or not your activities made a difference, that's where the outcomes come to mind. So you did 100 trainings, but did those trainings change the knowledge and competency of the teachers who were trained, right? Did that peer support program make a difference with the abstinence, with the housing security, with food security? So those are the pieces that we're going to talk about a little bit more in the outcomes. So let's just practice with this briefly. So I want you to take out a pen, piece of paper, and I want you to think about the projects that you currently work with. So again, you may be able to apply this to a proposal, but I think it's easier to apply this in mine. And we're thinking about, again, those inputs and outputs, those are kind of the process pieces of your project. And then the outcomes are kind of the second half. So when you think about your inputs, and the projects, let's say you're doing a smoking cessation project or suicide prevention or your cat cafe, what is it that what are the resources you currently have to invest in the success of this project? You have a donor, you have volunteers, you have a restaurant facility, identified. So just take a moment and you can either write them down, or actually, if you want to put them in the chat, that might be helpful for us to all see. So go ahead and in the chat, share with us, what are those inputs that you have to invest in this idea, this project that you have going? Cash, sweat equity, time, passion, excellent. Stacy's talking about a project that she's working on, and the staff that are running this program have connections with healthcare providers across the state, and that allows them to be able to do more effective outreach, engage stakeholders. Good. Okay, let's move to the activities. So you have certain resources in place, right? You've got some of the ingredients that are going to help you be successful. Now, what do you want to do? What are the activities, the things that you're going to do to help address this unmet need and to help meet the goal that you set with the project? So go ahead and share it in the chat. So I can take Stacy's example. And Stacy and her colleague are facilitating Project Echoes across the state. And they're training healthcare providers, virtual didactic presentations for medical providers. But part of that is not only just running those trainings, but there's also the recruitment piece, recruiting folks to do case presentations, but also recruiting healthcare providers to be participants. So that's also in there. Good. Training our existing staff and a new community health worker in primary prevention for substance misuse. Very good. Okay, great. So you've got your activities. Who's your target? So we use Stacy's example. For one of hers, she's targeting, healthcare providers across the state who are treating Hep C, for example. Who's your target population for that program? Home visiting clients in Gallatin County, great. And then now let's move to outcomes. What is it that you are hoping your target population, what do you want them to get from your activity? What do you want them to get from their training? What do you want to be that lasting impact, whether it's a short-term or medium-term or long-term outcome, right? So for the peer support program I worked with, the short-term is that they hired and sustained, retained 2 to 3 peer workers, right? The medium-term outcomes were what SAMHSA, the funder, had indicated, which was increasing housing stability, increasing food security, increasing employment status, decreasing substance use. So those were the specific measures. And then long-term, what we had decided or established were the outcomes. We wanted to increase their overall health and wellness, and we measured that by a quality of life tool. So Monique is saying individuals with autism and other special needs have more independence, which can be measured, healthier, more fulfilling life, and then social engagement, both things that can be measured through even just using a quality of life tool that we talked about. Okay, so that's the spirit of the logic model. They're all connected. And they set us up well for the evaluation. So this logic model poises us to think about outcomes, right? What is it that we want? What are we going to do? And what do we hope is the result of our activities or our intervention? So now I want to scan out for just a bit and talk more broadly about program evaluation as it applies to your grant proposal. So in the evaluation part of the proposal, you want to describe your plans to evaluate the success of your proposal once it's implemented. So here's some considerations to keep in mind. So first of all, when we talked about the last session, I think it was, well, Mary talked quite a bit because I was having internet issues, but I think it was in your section, Mary, we talked about, reading, making sure we're reading the RFP really well. We want to know, reading many times over, what are the specific things that they're looking for, and particularly as it applies to the evaluation. So if they're asking for specific performance measures, we want to make sure that we're articulating an evaluation plan that collects the data to demonstrate those measures. So for the peer support program that I talked about, those measures of, abstinence, housing stability, increased access to healthcare, employment status, those are all the things that SAMHSA said, we want to know if there's changes in this as a result of your plan, right? So you definitely want to include that in your evaluation plan. You definitely want to describe how you're going to collect that data and how you're using that data to pivot programming as needed. Again, you want your evaluation plan to be really connected to your objectives. If your objectives are the specific ways in which you're going to reach your goals, and then we know they're going to be SMART, right? They're going to be measurable. Our evaluation plan is going to talk about how we're going to get across that data. So, I am looking at Stacy's last comment. She's talking about she wants the knowledge that providers are receiving from their trainings to increase that testing and treatment for people with hepatitis C. And so she could measure how many people in that area or in that county are being tested before their access training and then now after they're accessing training. So we really want to make sure that our evaluation plan connects to the objectives. And then describing any instruments or questionnaires that we're going to use. Like I mentioned, that World Health Organization quality of life tool. So I talk about, describe the tool. I talk about the evidence to demonstrate that this is a valid tool and how we're going to go about using it. So, we're a big fan of both of that quality improvement process. And I know in public health, you are too. And so in your evaluation plan, you're going to be talking about outcomes, like did we make a difference?
but you're also going to be describing, what is our process of collecting and reviewing data along the way. So we're not just looking at our data at year 4.5 of a 5-year grant and saying, oh gosh, I guess we should pivot, that's just embedded in your program design. And then lastly, this outside evaluator, like some of these bigger federal grants will say you have to have an outside evaluator. And if that's the case, if you do have to hire someone, that's where you want to get really specific and do that research so you can find out like how much that person's going to cost. So Jeff will talk about that. So there may be a situation where you want to bring in an outside evaluator, and there also be, maybe a situation where your team has the skills necessary to do the evaluation internal. And that's usually indicated by the RFP. So just a little piece on evaluation. We think about evaluation in terms of these sort of 2 primary buckets. Did we do what we said we were going to do? And did it make a difference? Did we have an impact? So that logic model talked about those outcomes, those specific things, like did our training increase the confidence and competence of healthcare providers to test for Hep C, right? So that's the outcome. Also valuable is our process or implementation evaluation. Like we said in our proposal that we were going to roll out the training in this way. So in order to monitor program implementation, in order to measure, like, did we do what we said we were going to do, we have to collect data along the way. And that's that continuous quality improvement piece that I was talking about. And then, lastly, these outcomes, always the question we're asking, because I think it's easy for us to promise the moon and promise these big lofty goals. And then we realize, oh crap, maybe I don't know that we can actually measure that, or maybe that's out of our control. Is we want to get really specific, really granular. What do we want people to get out of our program? How do we know we're making a difference? And then what changed for people because they experienced our program? So while we want to reduce teen pregnancies, for example, we might not be able to measure that in an impactful way during the tenure of our grant, but we can perhaps measure teens increase education in the use of contraceptions, for example. So really getting specific about what is your training, for example, targeting. Okay, that was a lot of information. And so what our plan now is to digest that and kind of, chew on that information a little bit in our smaller groups. So Emily's going to put us in our smaller groups, and then we're going to apply what we learned into our scenarios. All right, so before we switch over to Jeff's section, I want to hear just a couple volunteers from you all. Mary, Jeff, feel free to jump in, but we want to hear from the rest of you as well. Like, what are some ahas or things that you talked about, thought about in your small groups? Is anyone feeling brave to share, adventurous? They want to share? Yes, Stacy.
So Susan had an example of recycling, and she lives in the next town over from Billings and Laurel, and she brought up some things about our landfill that I didn't know about in my own town, which was really eye-opening. And so one of her ideas is finding out how other people in her community of Laurel that doesn't have recycling feel about it. And I think I'm understanding it, Susan, pipe up here since it's your idea. But Jeff, the aha for me was all the questions Jeff asked, which were very direct, and like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. Like for instance, one example was if people are going around door to door to query people, are they bringing anything with them? Like you have to consider every, factor that might come up. And so just really thinking through instead of just the big picture. I'm a big picture person. It's harder for me to think of the details. So I have to have people around me who ask those questions so I can come up with those. So that was really helpful.
It's also a nice example of that, like how when you're writing the proposal, not only to have thought partners and also other people read your proposal that aren't embedded in the idea, because they're going to have a perspective that you might not have considered because you're in the weeds of it. So it's a great example.
And when I was younger,
other-
I probably would have thought my idea was being attacked. But now that I'm older, I just kind of go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Like my pride is mostly gone. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. They're helping me get smarter about this. Yeah, it's good.
I would just throw in there was a question at the end of our group of what if you don't know all of these pieces and you want the funding to figure it out, and finding that balance between of credibility and demonstrating kind of a capacity to address the need, yet where does the flexibility of not necessarily knowing all those answers? How do you work that in? And I give others a chance to answer this as well, but I suggested that you really need to be credible with the funder, that if you're asking me for money, that you need me to be convinced that what you're going to do is going to address the problem. So it can't be this is a problem, give me money and I'll work on it. But that there also is a flexibility, and that you may have a plan A and a plan B. So in that example, going door to door, it may be that no one answers the door, and that you have to turn around and regroup and rethink. So I would say, as you think about those types of things, don't let that stop you as writers. Of you confidently present your plan, and then also, and we'll talk about this more in sustainability. If it's not working, it's not working, and then it's always okay to go back to the funder and say, but you don't want to let that color how you write the plan in the first place. That is the value of the logic model: is follow through it, have the detail, have confidence, and this is what we're going to try to address the problem. So you don't want to be soft on it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say with that, you also want to articulate your evaluation plan that's going to collect and review data along the way, so you know how and when to pivot. So if you're trying out a new idea, but you also, and you're like, we're trying this out, we have reason to believe that this is going to work, and we're going to be evaluating along the way. And this is how we're going to evaluate. This is how we're going to measure whether or not we're hitting the mark or not. And we're going to pivot accordingly. Like if you can also communicate a solid evaluation in that plan, then it gives you the levers to make those changes. And I think funders, appreciate that kind of commitment to quality improvement.
I was
What else?
wondering, I'm not sure how it looks or how it presents or whatever, because in my mind, it's got to be like phases. And I don't know if phases would turn off a funding source, because I've got like, okay, here's this initial, like you're getting the information. Okay, here's the recycling and that process. And then ultimately, and I see it, and I don't know, do you mess with people when you go, I actually had this ultimate idea of a recycling center for glass that we don't have here, because, hey, there's this land and it's really close to the railroad. And part of the reason why we don't recycle glass in Montana is because it's so expensive, it's so heavy, that it costs so much money to ship it out to Salt Lake City. And the thing about Laurel is it is the largest railroad hub between Minneapolis and Seattle. So we have this unique setup. So right there's the train. It's the cheapest way to haul this to Utah. So does that turn them off though, to think of the phases, or do you just shush up and not even mention that big idea of like the recycling for the glass?
I can
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think
might
it
be delayed,
depends on who you what kind of grant you're going for, and the length of the grant and the amount of the money. Like it may be really reasonable to go for a smaller short-term grant to demonstrate like proof of concept that this actually method could work. And then once you demonstrate that it works, then you're poised to to propose a bigger, grander, longer term idea, in which case you'd need more funding for that. Those are my thoughts. But Mary and Jeff, jump in.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would say in terms of the phase piece, there's nothing wrong with talking about phases within you getting to the end goal that is reasonable within that grant cycle. To say, we have to do this first within these couple months, and then we'll move to this phase. I think that shows a funder that you've thought through it. As somebody who has read many grant applications, I would say I don't include sort of goals and plans and what you would like to accomplish that are not going to be funded or don't relate to this grant period, to this money. Because then you start to confuse folks, where you go, wait, I thought you were talking about doing this, which felt really reasonable within the amount of money, within the amount of funding, with what we've put out there. And now you're talking about something that might take like 5 years and like a lot more dollars. And so that's fine for you to hold in your head, like Kate said, where it's sort of proof of concept, where you've got that plan in the background. But in terms of communicating to a funder within a grant application, I think you keep it as direct and succinct to that funding opportunity as you can.
And remember last week, we talked about doing the research of your funder and knowing about who they are and what they like to fund. So remember, if you're finding someone who likes to fund something in the recycling world, they know about recycling and they know what's feasible and what's possible. And so if you came out with a first grant and said, we're going to build glass recycling in Laurel, there's a lot of reasons why we don't have glass recycling and costs and all those things. If you said that's what we're going to do, give us money to do it, I would be reluctant and not suspicious, but I wouldn't be so sure you could really do that. But if you described the problem as you have done well, and as Kate suggested, did a feasibility study or proof of concept, I might be very happy to do that, because I understand that is a really big project in and of itself to determine towards the end of, we'd like to see if it's feasible to recycle glass, because, and again, that's something that could be measurable. We have 50 metric tons a week of garbage coming in, and 5 metric tons of it is glass. So I could point to why I want to focus on that, but no one's been able to successfully do glass. And so we really need to do a feasibility study and determine what it would take to make that happen. And that sounds fundable. It's scoping it down to a reasonable, doable effort.
Thank you. And
All
sorry
right.
it wasn't work related.
Well, I think it's a really nice example of something that would apply across proposal ideas. So thank you. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jeff and share my slides, and he's going to talk about budget sustainability.
So budget. And so when we're asking for these grants, typically, not always, but we're asking for money. And so all of this is premised on that this is a money ask. And as we get down to those details of what is it actually you're going to do, and really breaking down those activities, you really need to get to real costs. One of the things that I think is, well, I can tell you, when I'm looking at a proposal, I look at the budget first, because I want to see, is this really doable? Is the activities and the things they're telling me going to do, are they really asking for the money, and are they getting the money that it's going to take to complete those things? Do we really have the money, as Kate had that slide up earlier, to do what we say we're going to do? That I don't want to give you, whether it's $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 or $1 million, if you're not really going to follow through on what it is I think I'm funding. I have some responsibility as a funder. I have perhaps even a fiduciary duty to wherever this money is coming from, to make sure that it's spent on my purpose towards the end that I think it's going to do. So always make sure there is very clear and direct alignment between your activities and what you say you're going to do, and the dollars that it really costs to do it. Now, that said, we all know, we see a grant, we know it's a $10,000 grant, and we're always trying to kind of make a round peg fit a square hole. And so the reality of doing that is you have to do both at the same time. It has to be real, it has to fit, but it also needs to be within the parameters of what the funder funds. Most of the time, when you see a grant proposal, it's going to tell you what the average grant is. It's going to tell you how much money they have overall. Sometimes you'll see how many awards they intend to give, and you can kind of figure out what you think the sweet spot of the budget is. There's some people who spend a lot of time strategizing about, if they're doing 10 awards and they have $500,000, that's $50,000 each. So we're going to come in at $49,999. That's an okay strategy, and it's okay to think, okay, we should live in that ballpark around 50,000. But if you have a really great proposal and a really great idea, and funding it is going to push you up to 60, 70,000, 100,000, there's no reason not to put that in there. And what you don't want to do is undercut what it really costs to do it. Because again, when I look at them, I'm looking at the budget so that if you've undersold yourself and you've got, I'm just going to stick with Susan's example, I've got to go knock on 5,000 doors, but I'm going to have volunteers do that, but I don't have any money for a volunteer coordinator, or I don't have any money for transportation. We talked about leafleting these doors, but you don't have any money in the budget or identified costs for printing or designing those materials. Then I'm going to say they're not really going to get that done, or they have some other method. So one of the things to always look at too is matching funds. And sometimes matching funds can be direct. You actually have to come up with the cash. So this is a $10,000 project. We're going to put $2,500 of our own money up, and we want you to give us the other $7,500, and you can add zeros to that or whatever. But that sometimes, so some funders want you to have skin in the game, and that's kind of a direct match. We want you to put your own money on the table. It shows us you're committed to it. It shows some level of organizational commitment, and it's part of your strategic plan. It's not just a little side project or a thing you're doing. Sometimes grants will have in-kind matches. So an in-kind match isn't a hard dollar match, and I see that question, but I'll come to that in a sec. An in-kind match is it's work that you're doing. It's so that, and sometimes that could be the use of your space, it could be your heat and your lights, it could be, maybe you already have a graphic artist that works in a partner's shop, and they've agreed to do to putting together your brochure and pamphlet for you, and they're not going to charge you for it. Put that in your grant. That's an in-kind matching part. If you have partners in your budget that are providing things, and even when there's no requirement for that kind of in-kind matching, sometimes it helps to show that you're leveraging other payment sources, and that your budget is diversified, and that you have other partners and people that are putting up money, including your own organization. That we recognize this is a $100,000 project, and we're only asking you for 60 because we're committed to it. We're already paying $40,000 for other staff and other things. Even in the absence of a required match, it can be a good strategy to demonstrate that you do have skin in the game and that you are committed and your organization is doing that. So how much does it really cost to do these things? That sometimes takes a little bit of guessing, right? And there's, you could say a little guessing, a little fudging, a little bit of wishful thinking. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be your best guess. There's pieces like, one of the things that I see in a lot of grants, and I really don't have the best answer for this, but I need a year for an FTE, and I'm going to pay them $45,000, and so I asked for $45,000. Well, that sounds good, but I have a bunch of questions about that. What about fringe benefits? What about days off? What about health insurance? What about all of the other costs, payroll taxes, and the things that go along with hiring that employee? So it's going to cost more than $45,000. On the other hand, how long is it going to take to hire that person? And am I going to have them, if this grant only lasts for a year and I need to hire this person, do I really need 12 months of funding, or is it going to take me a month or 2 or 3? Or do I already have that person lined up and they're going to start day one and I really do need the full $45,000? So I think those are things to consider. And anytime I think you get into that level of detail, and your budget is more congruent and more tied to exactly the activities you're going to doing, it's more sellable. And I'm going to see that as your grant reader and your grant manager, and find credibility in that. We're going to look at the chat question. If our total project costs 10,000, should we ask for 10,000, even if the funder says only $7,000? Strategic question. One of the things that you can do is, as we've mentioned, go back and research. What have they funded before? Do they have, and oftentimes grant tours will put on their website, or they'll be in their materials, or you can call them up and you can say, how are you guys going to respond if our project costs $10,000 and it looks like you're averaging $7,000? Is that something you guys would entertain? And they'll tell you, or you'll see that they've never, ever funded anything over $5,000. And you should read that as saying, well, I'm not the special guy who all of a sudden is going to get 10. And you should probably come in with a project under 5, or if the project's not doable, it's the wrong grant. And that's okay too. Don't try to force fit your budget into who they are and what they are. Stay true to what you're trying to do. That's that congruence between the activities you're selling to solve the problem that the way you think it should be sold, and not to do that. Include travel, include supplies, space. We're going to have community meetings. So let's move Susan's project to Billings, where I can't really go door to door and do 70,000 doors. So I'm going to hold a series of community meetings. Well, where are those meetings going to be? Well, they're going to be at the local hotels in town or conference rooms. And so is that costs money. And if I see that that's what your plan is and you didn't put in money for that, I'm thinking, I don't know if you can do that. On the other hand, you may say, we've coordinated with 10 of the banks in town and they've all volunteered their conference room. That is an in-kind match. It's not really a fixed dollar amount that you can say, but you will notice that I don't have that. In addition to the spreadsheet for budget, you're also going to have what's going to be called a budget justification or a budget narrative. That's the language you're going to see: budget justification, budget narrative. So they want to see a spreadsheet that just says, Jeff, 1 FTE, $45,000, $8,000 fringe benefits, $6,000 for supplies. I need to buy him a computer for $2,250. We need to rent space. They want to see that kind of detail. But then they're going to want to also see a detail of Jeff, program director, $45,000. What am I doing? What is my activities and my role as the program director? I need to get pretty specific so that they know, so that when I list Kate right under me as program manager and I have a manager and a director, why do I need 2 people to do that? And what's Jeff's job versus Kate's job? Why am I paying for 2 people? And am I just subsidizing salaries for them? Or is it really 2 people's worth of work? And how does that break down? And so budget narrative, budget justification really is, and usually real quick, little paragraph. Jeff is going to be responsible for all project management and oversight. He'll be controlling the budget. He'll be doing communication with the grant office. He's going to be doing all of the hiring. He's responsible for whatever details you want to put in there. Kate's going to be the program manager. She's going to oversee the volunteers. She's going to train them. She's going to be sure the printing is good. She's got that job. You want to give that narrative. Supplies, $5,000. You can't just say supplies, $5,000. We're going to print 1,050 brochures and they cost $1.27 a piece. And as I say that, remember, things are not stuck in stone. How do I know they're really going to be $1.27? It might be 8 months from now before I actually get this grant, and the price of printing might have changed or gone up or down. And when I thought I could get 1,000 before for $2,200, now all of a sudden 1,000 costs $4,000. Move forward with your budget with confidence, kind of what I was saying before, that it is. I may have 1,000 of them and they cost $2,500. That's it. No hedges, no asterisks. No, we're going to watch the cost of printing. Maybe the cost of ink is going up, so we want to be careful of this. Be confident, move forward. No hedging, but at the same time, you're not stuck in stone. You know that if it comes through and workforce demands change, or the cost of renting a hotel space change, things change, and you're not going to be so stuck with that budget that you can't move forward. Once once I fund you, and this is going to be a little bit of the segue to sustainability. Once I fund you and you have my money now, and I have a duty to whoever it came from, and as the manager of this money that I just gave you, to make sure that you do what you say you're going to do. So I'm invested with you in your success at this point. And I recognize that things are going to change and that things are different and that you need to pivot sometimes, and that you know, my plan was to go out and knock on 4,000 doors in Laurel. And boy, we knocked on the first 1,000 and only 2 people answered the door. And so by the time we get to 4,000, we're going to have 8 surveys filled out, and that's not going to give us the information we need to evaluate what we're doing. That's pretty good indicator that I probably shouldn't keep doing that. I'm going to talk to my grant manager, my person that's assigned with the grant, and talk to them about it. And I think people get nervous about writing their grants, writing their plans and their goals and their objectives, their evaluation plan. And Kate said this very well a few minutes ago. That's what the evaluation data is for. The evaluation data is so that you start to get indicators of what's working, what's not, what makes sense. And funders want to see that. And if they see that you're actively looking at your data, that boy, I'm supposed to knock on 4,000 doors, and it turns out that's not going to be helpful. They want to know. They want to know exactly what it is. If the project budget's more than what it's going to cost or what the grant is offering, again, talk to the people that are giving the money, look at some of the past grants. It's okay to ask for a little bit more. You can show other people that might provide money and support to do that project. And that's, again, a part of sustainability. So when we talk about budget, you know, we're on money here. And part of keeping a grant going and keeping a project going that might be started with a grant in sustainability, we're always talking about financial sustainability, and we always think about the money first. And of course we do. And there's a reason for that, is because if we don't have the money, we can't pay the people, we can't do the work, we can't get it done. But there's also aspects of sustainability relative to not just the financial piece, but the community itself and your organization itself. And so one of the things, especially when you're seeing that you need some funds, and that this grant you're asking for doesn't pay for 100% of it, what you're showing is that some of the sustainability that's built into this project, whether it's through a direct match or an in-kind match, or if there may be a no match requirement, but you're still doing it, is that you have organizational commitment. So one of the things that you can put forward in your sustainability plan, and I should probably go a little bit backwards, is you know, the sustainability plan spells out how your project's going to survive long term, how you're going to keep, how you're going to assure me as your funder that the resources that you're spending aren't going to be lost, that that there's going to be a benefit for this. I want to be assured that if I give you this money, that it's going to have some kind of long-lasting impact, something that even when my money runs out, that it's going on. So that when we talk about sustainability of a grant, we're talking about that there's something still in place when my money and my involvement with your project is gone. Kate, you have a hand up? You're muted.
Do I have a handout?
A hand up? Oh, it looks like your
Oh,
hand.
I don't think it's me. Is it someone else?
Was someone else?
I think you're good.
All right, cool.
Okay.
So if you have some organizational commitment, part of sustainability, and how do you show that is the question. If I'm writing a sustainability plan, I could show it as being a part of my strategic plan that is part of the fabric of my organization. I want to show how it's aligned with my mission and the work that is our ongoing work. I want to show how it's something we've been doing, that we have capacity for, and that you're just enhancing it. And when we talk about that organizational sustainability, oftentimes what I'll say or I'll see is variations of we're doing this. Our organization is going to put a recycling bin in front of every house. And we have a plan to do this. And with the current revenue that we have and the way our business model is, it's going to take us 5 years. But with your funding, we think we can complete it in a year. And so this is just going to accelerate something that's in our strategic plan and move it forward. And we already have the mechanisms to sustain this. We don't have all of the money up front to buy the bins. I mean, that's a very concrete example, but that's we just for us to get the bins, we can afford to buy 100 bins a year, but we need 1,000. So it's going to take us years to get enough bins. But we already have a plan for how we're going to pick the bins up, and we already have trucks, and we already have drivers, and we already have an organizational commitment. Another piece is community sustainability. It doesn't have to just be me. That I'm going to put this project together, and I have partners, and I'm leveraging other funding. You're not the only funder. So this goes back to the question of what if they don't have enough? Well, we're asking you for $10,000, but the bank association is also putting in $50,000, and our organization is also committed because we have what we described earlier as inputs. We already have stuff. We already are invested. We're already doing things. We've already had people that have researched the problem. We have experts and subject matter experts on the weight and cost of garbage transport, building whatever it is, or whatever project we're doing. So the community is going to benefit and already has it. We had an example in our group from Stacy about health in prisons and syphilis and the prevalence of syphilis in prisons. Well, I have a partner in the county in that case, in the detention center. I have a partner in the health department, and so they already have expertise. We don't have to train a bunch of people to learn how to do these tests. The community health center is going to continue to do these tests, but there's a tremendous upfront cost of actually buying these tests. So to get this unrolled, we actually need the test materials and equipment itself. So showing that kind of community sustainability is another piece. The one thing that I would guard against is and we all fall into this, is this is going to be so great and everybody's going to love it and someone's going to sustain it. That it's going to be everyone's going to fall so much in love with my project, and I'm going to cure cancer. And so when everyone sees there's no more cancer in the world, they're going to be falling over themselves to pay for me to keep doing this. That rarely is going to work. You need to have a good sustainability plan. That said, it's really difficult, and most grant projects aren't sustained, and most funders know that. So you really want to be creative. You really want to come up with good ideas. You really want to invite the funder at some point to help feed in to, they are also your partner. They are part of your community sustainability because they are now part of your community. And so really working with them, because like I said earlier, they are as committed as you are to see the success of your grant. And so it's really working with everyone to figure that out. Pivoting on sustainability plans over and over happens all the time. It's seen as a good thing, and it creates more assurance that something really is going to happen. Many times, many times, grants are not sustainable. It's one of the challenges, and people will tell you, and you've all seen it, of being dependent on grant funds for any kind of a project. If you're dependent on grant funds, there's the risk of the funds are gone and the service is gone. And that's particularly something we have to pay attention to in human services. If it's not a one-time thing, like you're going to speed this up by buying us all the vaccines, or you're going to buy these bins, and it's an ongoing service. I'm hiring 3 counselors to work in a school to help prevent suicide, and the money goes away. There really aren't 3 counselors anymore. And I really may have set up a whole bunch of people to be getting services that I can no longer give them, that I have to take away. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves about whether we really have an ability to sustain this. And then in some of those cases, we may honestly say, boy, we have no idea how to sustain that counselors in the school. But the value to you, Mr. Funder, is whether that's even a model that works. We don't even know whether that works. And so doing the evaluation is a product in and of itself. And so the long-term benefit of spending your resources is knowledge and is gaining knowledge. And so sometimes sustainability is the sustainability of that knowledge, and the sustainability of the project is in what's learned from it and what can happen going forward. And not always that those exact positions and the exact things that you're doing are going to continue. So that's another consideration. And with that, in the interest of time, I'm going to kick it back.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take 15 minutes and we're going to again apply these concepts of sustainability and budget into our small group. So Emily, whenever you're ready, we'll just jump on over to the breakout groups. Thanks, everyone. Any quick ahas before we pass it over to Mary to wrap us up, but things that came up in your group that you realized in terms of sustainability or things to think through that you think other people might benefit from this aha?
If we don't have that, I was wondering, is there an example somewhere of what it looks like to actually do your reporting back to the agency that you received the funding from? Do we have what that tends to look like? And yeah, just do we have a sample of that?
We talked about that just a bit in my group of it can really vary on the funder as well in terms of what you have to report back. Like some grant sources, particularly foundation funding, they might be just okay with you reporting your invoice once a month and submitting and saying, this is what we spent. Whereas if you're receiving state funding, federal funding, you'll have to track and document every expense. And a lot of times that has to go along with your monthly invoice that you submit. You then have to have some sort of documentation that ties to every line item within that invoice. And so having a plan from the get-go of how you're going to document, sort of keep track of all of your expenses, super, super critical, because nothing is worse than being in a sticky situation where you've got to backtrack and then potentially be in a place where you can't justify the funding that you've invoiced for. Even though it's legit, the funder might be saying, if I don't have an invoice, I won't pay it. So being thoughtful about that from the get-go.
That's great. So we have a question in the chat around the easiest way to use grants.gov. Do you want to just use this as your window into the next section?
Yes, I was planning on doing that. So let me go ahead and share. All right. Can y'all see that? See grants.gov? Okay. So yeah, absolutely. This is actually a handy website. I will say in terms of searching for grants, grants.gov is fairly user-friendly. And so I mentioned this last time that this is really the hub for sort of all federal funding opportunities. So if you're in a position where you're thinking about it or could apply for federal funding, this will be your go-to spot. So if we're thinking about searching for grant opportunities, we will go to the search grants button. And I'll just go over, like, this is also the hub where you would do an application. If you are awarded a federal grant, you'd be able to work through here. So that's some of these other pieces. Again, they have like instructions for how to apply. If you do apply, how you can track your application, all of these things. So we'll go to search grants. And this is what pops up. So you have some different options here, and I'll just kind of run through some of these biggie things, and then I'll show you a brief search. So when we're thinking about basic search criteria, opportunity numbers and CFDAs, those are specific to a particular grant. So if you know that there's a grant out there and you happen to be able to have tracked down the opportunity number or it's the certified something, the CFDA, then you can specifically plug that in there to find it right away. Most of the time, you're probably going to be looking at, I have some sort of issue, some sort of initiative I'd like to work on. And so I'm thinking about a keyword and you're trying to search to see if that opportunity exists. So opportunity status forecasted means that it's an opportunity that could be live in the coming future. So this is where the federal government might have a plan, say like, we have this idea for a grant, but we have not yet put it out for folks to apply for. Sometimes these go away. Sometimes forecasted grants just don't get posted. But posted grants are the ones where they're open, they're live, and you are able to apply for them. Closed is where an application cycle is ended, and archived is essentially everything else. So all the oldies, where you might be able to take a look back. And if you are looking for a funding opportunity, you want to get a sense of like, is this program growing? Are they offering more funding, more opportunities? Sometimes archive grants can be helpful to look back on. Funding types. Generally, you're just going to keep this open because you want to see what they're about. Grants are sort of the usual, what we all think of. Cooperative agreements are where the federal government might be a closer partner in the project. But generally, you just want to keep that open to see what might be available. Eligibility is where this can be super helpful to narrow down. So this is just based on, okay, me as our entity, what will I be applying under? And so you can look at, there's a multitude of different eligibility pieces. A lot of grants will have several different types of eligibilities that you can pull from. So let's think about, say we want to focus on rural health. So I'll go ahead, just in the keywords, it's just like a Google search. If you want to have the words together, you put them in quotes, and we'll hit search. So we've got 21 options that come up. These are all forecasted or posted. But let's say I'm a public health department. So I'd be applying sort of under my county government. So we could click that. Now we're down to 9 results. You won't get a whole lot of information on this page. So you're going to have to go and click through and get a sense. The biggest one is if you're looking to apply, you're like, well, I'm probably not getting an application in next week, right? You can disregard some of the ones that have those more immediate. But let's say, we'll look at this one. This sounds interesting. Addressing conditions to improve population health. Like, okay, what's that about? So it comes up where you can have this sort of overview that they provide you. They give you the funding opportunity number so that if it is something of interest, you can jot that down. You can have it for future reference. Discretionary grants, we went over that last time. That just means it's a competitive application. But the biggies are really where you can get an immediate sense of like, is this something worth pursuing? Expected number of awards is 5. The award ceiling is 500,000. That is not a lot of grants, and that's a lot of money that they're offering per award. So this will be a competitive in terms of you only have 5 awards that they're planning to give out, and it's a whole lot of dollars. So if you're, say, a health department if you're the Lincoln County Health Department, you're probably not going to be in a position to be successful in this application. So you might at that point just say, nope, never mind, not going to go there. So you can go back. And one caveat is when you go back, it'll disappear. You're going to have to search again. You're going to have to county government again. But we can go and look at, closing the gap with social determinants of health. This one now says 15 awards with an award ceiling of 125,000. That might feel more doable, right? 15 is still competitive for sure, but it is not 5, and it's a more reasonable dollar amount in terms of what the size of your entity might be able to take on. So this is where you can then kind of scroll down and look a bit further of, are there cost sharing or matching requirements? No. So that means you will not have to document. You won't have to put any money up front. If you're looking at eligible applicants, you can see those listed here. And then there will be a brief description. Sometimes these can be longer. They can be, 1 or 2 sort of lengthy paragraphs, and sometimes they're brief. So it's talking about how do we help put together multi-sector plans that address social determinants of health within certain communities to improve chronic health conditions. And that might just ring your bell if you're a health department and you say, ooh, that is something that we would like to do. You can always then go to related documents. And this is where you'll find the full announcement. So you'll go here, you'll read the FOA, and that's really where it'll spell out all the details of the grant for you, where it'll really go in. We'll open it up. Looks like they revised one. And here you go, where it gives you the whole table of contents. And this is the RFP, where you will go line by line to see what's in there, what you've got to apply for. We've got 1 minute left in the call. So the last thing I will say is that you can create a profile on grants.gov. You can log in. And then if you find a grant opportunity that you're interested in, you can then hit subscribe. And then you will get alerts when anything changes with that grant. And you'll be able to then go to a list on your profile and quickly access all of them. So hopefully that was helpful, but I will stop sharing now.
Yeah, we packed in a lot of information over these last 2 trainings. And so I just want to extend, our information and let you know that if you have follow-up questions, if there's any way that we can be, of service or help you kind of problem solve, please don't hesitate to reach out. And Emily's going to follow up with both our slides from today, but also a couple more resources that might be helpful for you. Any lasting thoughts from you, Emily?
No, I put a link to our evaluation in the chat, so please take a moment and fill that in. We use that information. It's very valuable for us in our future trainings. And like she said, I will be sending out resources and contact info so you can follow up with additional questions as you embark on your grant writing journey.
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
you.